Welcome everybody to Entrepreneurial Spirit. Who does it best? You're going to hear from people who've actually traversed both corporate and startup. So everyone on this panel has had the experience of both. We're going to have a rigorous discussion around the pros and cons of working in a startup and also working in a corporate environment. And how do we fan that entrepreneurial spirit moving forward? Okay, before we get started, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we meet today. In my case, I'm in the Maston Ranges, and we are actually respecting the Dja Dja Wurrung people. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And I suggest you take a couple of moments to acknowledge the people of wherever environment you're in around the country, and just pause and acknowledge them. Okay, so you're at an event that has been put together by Stone and Chalk, and I'm going to share with you, for those who are on the call and don't know who Stone and Chalk are, we're Australia's leading impact network for emerging technology. So together with AusCyber, we've curated a community of 400 plus startups and scale-ups in the sectors including fintech, cybersecurity, AI, prop tech, reg tech, ag tech, space tech, and beyond. We are a not-for-profit, and we're here to identify, nurture, connect, and propel those looking to solve the world's most pressing social and business challenges. Now, you're here as part of the Pivott project. This is a project that's been powered by LaunchVic, and it's a project to enable people to have an end-to-end experience of what it's like to actually work in a startup or scale-up environment. We have an online learning academy, which has 12 modules, which takes people through exactly what it's like to work in a startup environment. There's some fantastic case studies from founders, and it's basically preparing people with their eyes wide open from how do they prepare for a job, and then when they're in a job, how do they actually succeed? We've got obviously these events and a series of workshops and experiences, particularly with Melbourne opening up. So next year we will have a lot of live experiences for people to tap into. We have a fantastic mentoring program called Connect, and we've actually got a pulse check with so I've been speaking to the mentors and mentees today at length, hearing their journey, and it's been really fascinating. And we've also got a new cohort of mentors and mentees about to start in December. And we've got a fantastic jobs platform. The unique proposition about the jobs platform is there's a terrific matching tool. And so it's not just about your skills and experience, it's about your values, it's about the culture of an organisation when they put in their profile details. And then obviously through an algorithm, you get matched. So it's a little bit more holistic in the approach. But thank you for joining a Pivot event. It's great. And we look forward to seeing you in person in late November. Now, today we have a fantastic panel. I've had the privilege of working with Marley. Marley Palin is actually currently a strategy manager for Monitor Deloitte, but she was the partnerships manager for Stone and Chalk when I first started, and she actually interviewed me. Marley's got an extensive background in strategy, and it's her passion. She has the most phenomenal brain I think I've ever worked with. Like, she's incredibly visionary. So she'll be bringing some really exciting stories about entrepreneurial spirit to this event. Warwick Kramer, again, I worked with Warwick, but only for a short time. He's just started this week a new role as Global Director, Innovation Strategy with IBM. And again, he has worked in some fascinating startup scenarios, and then right through to leading Vodafone in a CEO role in Europe a couple of years ago. Simon Crunden is a colleague from The Hub. So he actually is the founder and CEO of Nutrip, but he's also worked for corporate, been very overwhelmed and underwhelmed in that environment. And now he's got this fantastic product, which he has been working on for several years now, and he'll share more about that in a moment. Kelly Hutchinson is here representing the Deputy Chair of the Pearcey Foundation. So the Pearcey Foundation recognises entrepreneurship around the country. So she's responsible for, there's awards and recognition And she also wears a few other hats that she may share with you throughout the call. And David Carbines is a fantastic member of our Stone and Chalk cohort at the Melbourne Hub. And he is the co-founder and CEO of COGSflow. He has a very orthodox background in commerce and banking, but he now has his own business and he is ensconced in startup land. Okay, the entrepreneurial spirit, an attitude and approach to thinking that actively seeks out change rather than waiting to adapt to change. It's a mindset that embraces critical questioning, innovation, service, and continuous improvement. Someone with an entrepreneurial spirit, they have passion and purpose. So I go to the panel now. Passion and purpose. Who wants to get started? So passion and purpose is obviously a quality of entrepreneurship. Who would like to start and share with the guests here today what is a project or a job that really demonstrates passion and purpose for you? Who would like to go first? Kelly.
I'm going to go back to last century. I love saying that.
Oh.
And I took a chance. I went to Cambodia for 6 months.
I don't know what you mean by.
And there you go. There's Siri talking to us. But anyway, so I went to Cambodia for 6 months.
Yeah.
And I had no quite idea what I was doing, but I went as a volunteer and I worked with the university, but I ended up staying for 8 years. And in that time, I built out 2 startups. And the one that was, they're all quite crazy. I think there needs to be an element of the mad to take the journey, to take the idea. But the passion was, I could see all the stories that were around us and I could see there was a need for people with English, Cambodians, to learn English and actually read stories about their own culture. And I was there wanting to know what these different things I was seeing. So we created a magazine and it was called Vibe, the Cambodian Scene. And I put my money where my mouth is and I printed all the copies and didn't have a distribution network there. But it was still a passion and it was something that I took a risk. And it's actually the Pearcey Foundation. We say, take a risk, make a difference and inspire others. So that for me really encapsulated why I did what I did now that I reflect on it. And also what the work I've done with the Pearcey Foundation since coming back.
Yeah, that is such a passion project and such a period of your life devoted to that too. It's incredible. Is there still some legacy stuff?
Well, actually for that one, that was done within 18 months. And I always say I could have invested my money in stocks and lost them in the .com crash. I just did it through publishing something. It was earlier than internet time as far as publications, but a number of the people I employed have gone on and mentored and continued because they could see that the opportunity was there, and particularly in the social enterprise space, which is where I moved on into afterwards, in tech and development. So the IT and development, the opportunity that technology, as I kept saying to people, you're using technology to communicate information, ICT, that's it.
So now we're going to contrast that with Warwick. I'm going to put you in the hot seat. When was a time when you actually experienced real passion and purpose?
You know, I was thinking about this question quite a bit. And I think, Abby, for me, I think everything I've ever done in my career had to have passion, because I think that has to be the main driver. Otherwise, it becomes a job with just a paycheck. And I think if that's a metric, I think it's the wrong driver for me personally. So I think everything I've done, even when I think about it, I reflected on this, even through my whole career of even just starting up my own business, there was always a purpose and a passion behind everything I did. And then when I even moved into the corporate side, that sort of translated across thinking around how can I actually help others. And I think that was always been a big driver. So for me, it wasn't really just one thing. And if I don't get it, wherever I go or whatever I do, I'm out of there very quickly, because it's something that's, you know, it has to, you spend so much time there every day with whatever you do that it has to be the fundamental northern light.
Couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely support where you're coming from. Marley, I see you nodding. Does that resonate with you? I imagine it does.
I think the Northern Light, the North Star concept is a really important one. A phrase that I use a lot when we talk with founders is that you need people that are obsessed with the problem, not necessarily their solution. And I think that's where the purpose and the passion comes in. And for me, when I look at all of the things that I've done in my career that I've loved and that I've absolutely, that I've fallen in love with, I've been in love with the problem or the customer that I'm trying to solve that problem for. And some of them are really important emotive causes, and I had a startup that played in the domestic violence space. I had a health tech startup, so causes that really had importance. right down to things that I've worked on in corporate land where I've gone, oh, I would love that as a consumer. And I'm really passionate about it because I can see the need for it as a consumer. So yeah, I think for me, you need to be obsessed with solving a problem. Yeah, it's that you need to be obsessed. You need to be so passionate about solving a problem and solving it for a specific use case. And if you're passionate about the problem, you'll find a way to figure out the solution. So I think it's problem driven for me.
Yeah, interesting. What about you, David? Is that similar for you as well?
Yeah, great segue into problems. I am a massive problem kind of guy. I've approached startups from the social enterprise and impact investing space. And so with a consulting background, having come from Deloitte, we looked for founders that were arrogant enough to say this problem deserves to be solved, but humble enough to say, I just don't know exactly how to solve it. And working on business models and distributions and product and features, I've talked people round on their business model. I've talked people round on their roadmap and what should be this year and what should be next year. I've never talked anyone out of their passion. And my challenge to anyone who's attending this right now is, in the scary confines of your own moleskin post-it note land, write down what you're really passionate about. Like, seriously, take a pen, paper, or text it to yourself. Just write down what you're really passionate about. And I think that should be the start of your entrepreneurial journey.
I think you're absolutely spot on. And sometimes actually writing the words in a journal where you're constantly able to reference it and remind yourself of it is it's simple exercise, but it's a sort of purposeful exercise. Simon, what about you? You've obviously, you're in the same area, but you've taken it to a completely different.
My industry is a problem. So I work for the travel industry, and we've had our fair share of problems over the last couple of years. But really, the reason why I got out of, I work for a travel management company. I work for a global travel management company, and 13 years ago, I exited out of that because for lifestyle reasons, really, and I became a consultant, as we all do. And so I started working for primarily universities, and I did a lot of work for federal government as well, and talking to them about how they need to run their travel management program. And I found, and one of the reasons why I got into travel analytics first, which was around the ability to be able to consolidate data, was solving a problem for a customer. And then I pivoted out of that into New Trip, which was about being able to manage travel, not just through a travel management company. And there's a lot of travel that goes on that is booked and managed outside of travel management companies. So in today's environment, that's a huge issue for organisations. And so just using that idea of solving problems is really fundamental to what we do. And I think, and as David said, I think the primary reason why you get into your own business or you want to do things is to solve problems for customers. And to me, it's a real motivation for me. And there's nothing better than getting into a room with a group of people who've got some serious problems in the way they do things, and then being able to listen to what they're doing and being able to go into help them solve those problems. You help them, you don't solve the problems, you help them solve the problems, because quite often they need to implement those solutions themselves, and you're just the sort of the trigger point for them to get to where they need to be. So to me, that's a big part of what I need to do.
Yeah, and when you have those moments with people where it's that aha moment and you've got to that sweet spot and you think, so yeah, it's extremely satisfying. Warwick, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about your background. If you can share with the people on the call your experience working in global innovation for Vodafone, but also I'm curious to know that outside in innovation, where corporates partner with startups, your thoughts around that. So a little bit, if you can talk a little bit about your experience with Vodafone, and then talk about the outside in model and how effective that is, and where you've actually seen that work or not work.
Sure. So I was one of the CEOs for Vodafone in Europe, based in Europe, running all the innovation for the group. And my role was really there around thinking around how do we actually bring smaller companies, bring them into our organization, and then push them through and make them successful. So now in theory, it sounds really easy. In practice, it was actually really hard because, and I'll give you an example, we would have, when I started there many years ago, our procurement agreements were roughly around 300 pages long plus. And here is a small company coming in, and I'd say to them, I'd say to the procurement team, it's easier to go down the road and take a kidney out than it is to actually go through this document. It was just crazy. And then when you look at the payment terms, and then they're used to doing payment cycles of 180 days, whatever it might be, and that's just normal. That kills startups. So there was already automatically a disconnect. And my job was to try to harmonize that across multiple geographies. And by the time I left Vodafone, we had stood up that across 29 geographies globally with centers there. And what we did was we segmented the life cycle of a startup. Because what a lot of corporates don't understand is that life cycle journey. And they categorize a startup all into one bucket, which is very wrong.
Yeah.
So that's basically what I was doing over there in Vodafone. And I had a great time doing it because it was quite fulfilling in the sense where we designed the model around, and many startups probably on this call could understand this, is that when you go into big corporate, you really waste a lot of time with a lot of people that just want to have it and they want to have a chat. And what they don't realize is that, one, they're the wrong person in the organization to make the decision, but they just want to be nice and have a chat, etc. And that could chew up 6 months of the startup's time. That 6 months is so critical for them from a cash flow point of view that they're burning money. So one of my key objectives as well in terms of when we built out the model was to kill all of that and to make sure that the startups were going directly to who they had to speak to, validate it, either we're in or out. That was it. And I found it just saves so much time and anxiety for the startups. Getting to your question, who does it successful, or what does a successful model look like? It's an interesting one because I don't think anyone really does it brilliantly. And I don't think it's the fault of the corporate. I think it's the fault of both sides, because I think inherently, having come from the startup world and then working in corporate, there's an automatic disconnect of language to start off with. That's just immediate. There's an automatic disconnect in terms of risk. The startup will walk in and go, oh, you know what, I can do this, I can do this, I can do that. And what they're doing is fishing for the opportunity within the organization. But what they're not realizing on the other side of the table is that I'm sitting there going, oh my God, have they got focus? This is a huge amount of risk, because what are they actually good at? Are they going to just, the minute they get distracted, are they going to go somewhere else? There's definitely a change in the last few years with corporates. A need to want to work with that community, which is very good. And they're trying to make the difference. And I think building that win-win model, building a model around trust, really getting upfront around and being realistic about the key deliverables are and the milestones are, and breaking into smaller bite sizes is where I see models work very well. All right. I used to get startups coming to me and say, Warwick, we're going to do this agreement and then we want to roll it out in 5 countries. And go, great. But you don't have the money, you don't have the people to be able to scale it across. That's also bringing them back into that sort of realistic sphere.
And do you think also, based on the combination, and all of you on this call have had experience in corporate formal education, doing commerce degrees, accounting degrees, entrepreneurial degrees, all that sort of stuff. I'm just wondering, with the difference between the corporate and the startup, do you think sometimes a startup maybe doesn't have the levers in place to actually measure and quantify the success? Or do you think they have that in spades, and maybe it becomes over-engineered from the get-go? This is a question to everybody. So this was actually, David shared this question when we were preparing for this event, and he was talking about the evaluation levers. So you get to a certain stage and then you move into the next stage. You get to a certain stage, you move into that. What are the quantifiable and the qualified responses or experiences that will take you to that next level? And this is not just about funding. So who would like to talk to that? So the qualitative and quantitative data sets that you're working with, but then in your planning, is it a lever that then moves you into that next stage? And are you using those effectively? And do you have them in place? I know we have at the moment, particularly for this project that we're working on. Who would like to go to that question? Because it's a really important one. David,
Abby, it's a great question and it's well suggested. I think the measures of success in corporates and startups are just fundamentally different. So in startups, are you going to live in 12 months' time? And by design, startups are designed for growth. They're chasing new business models and they're trying to bring the future forward and make it achievable for, well, first believers and early adopters and then everyone. And that's inherently hard. That's inherently disconnected from what we're doing right now. And the world in which we live makes that accessible and possible, which is a super exciting time to live. In large corporates, the definitions of success tend to be very different. They tend to be marginal product or marginal profit. Can we move it forward a couple of basis points? We're a massive organization. I did the grad program at Aldi Supermarkets. If I could say the second per customer per checkout, that's a multi-million-dollar idea. That's not really exciting in startup land. Instead, it's, how do we get rid of checkouts altogether? So I think the ideas of success, or the like what success looks like, is very different. And then how we get there and how that works. In startup land, you're going out and trying to sell to basically anyone that will listen to you. In massive corporates, there's 3 or 4 key decision makers, and then you need to line up the 20 people behind each one of them. And if any one of them blinks, you're dead and lost in cycles and reviews for the next 6 months until someone gets promoted or loses their job and you start all over again. So I think the ideas of success are just very different. Keen for others' thoughts or others' experiences around if they agree or disagree.
Yeah. I think you nailed that.
That felt like a bit of group therapy.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think.
Oh, you go, Simon.
I was just about to say, I think the way we look at it is, does it make sense to us that we are, chasing an aspect or a new bit of functionality or whatever it is that we are doing? So we need to, and part of that is, will it add value to our customers? And then what impact is that going to have on us as a business? And then if those sorts of things make sense, then we'd try and look at the size of the opportunity. Can we replicate across different sites or different customers? What's the adoption going to be like? How are we going to make money out of it? So there's a lot of things that we try and look at. Now, and so there's a lot of data points. Can we organise all those data points effectively? We tend to do things on the run, on the fly. We tend to, that's the way, we better start to measure this, and then we put systems in place to measure this, and then we'll adapt all the time. So you're always looking at ways you can to measure things and score them, and so understand whether it's been effective. Now, a lot of that comes from experience. We've blown months on developing a certain aspect because we thought that was right, but we actually didn't do the quantitative part of it correctly, and we released it, and 2 or 3 people have used the product. And so there's a lot of that sort of stuff that you need to, and over time you get very good at it because you have to.
Kelly, I'm interested in your experience.
I'm trying to draw which one I'm going to bring from.
Yeah. I know it's probably. Yeah. And Marley, as one of the many hats I've done over life is an evaluator, right? Yeah. Data and evaluation and monitoring. That's where the nerdiness comes in. And sometimes we know that we have a tendency to gather lots of information, but it's not necessarily what you need. And there's a difference of monitoring how you're going and then pivoting as you go along. For any program, any product, service you might deliver. And then there's the points at which you must do an evaluation, right? So you must say it's a 6-monthly cycle or an annual cycle. What's the end of the funding round? If you were part of a startup entrepreneurial program, you'd have something you're needing to meet that evaluation. So it's really sometimes really hard to know which masters you're reporting to. So which type of partner you have, or customer or growth trajectory should dictate where you need to measure. And as you said there, Simon, it's always on the fly, because the reality is you're always responding. And when you're in that early stage of growing, you've got a product that maybe could service multiple sectors. Is one of the things is when you spend so much time working on one and it doesn't happen. Yeah. And you're talking about the corporate, but it's also the same for government purchasing, right? They're very large organizations, educational institutions, anywhere you're trying to sell into that's got a long decision-making cycle and all those things. It's when you put and know what those measures they're wanting to know, and it might mean the wrong one, right? So it's being able to gather enough data that should be able to be relevant to many different purposes. And then in the end, it'll be big gut. That'll be how much of a risk profile have I personally got to go, I'm going to run this month on the credit card again, right? Yeah. One of those, like you were talking, before, David, it's like there's sometimes those points you are making those decisions. And if you don't have that, you talked about spirit, that risk spirit, that it's the adrenaline that has, but the fear, then it's not the journey for you. Yep. I think that's a fascinating topic you've just brought up, that fear, genuine anxiety. Am I going to be able to pay my bills? Am I going to be able to particularly
pay my staff
more to the startups? But then you also have, when you're working in a corporate environment with corporate innovation, you've got the frustration of having to deal with so many different entities within one entity and all that sort of stuff. So Marley, this question's for you. I'm really curious to know, when it comes to that entrepreneurial spirit, and that I always think we don't give enough credit to the qualitative data. It's all about And I know data sets, it's all about the numbers and stuff like that, and it has to be when you're setting up a business. But the qualitative experience and the anecdotal understanding of innovation, how do you keep that spirit alive with your teams? How do you keep them when they're perhaps bogged down with all the other stuff? You really want them to be motivated. I know from my personal experience of working with you, I know that this is something you're extremely good at, but what is it that you do that fans that enthusiasm and that spirit around the innovation? How do you keep that alive and people really motivated?
Yeah, interesting one. Sorry, it's not something I ever consciously put thinking into. I think different ways. Firstly, I'm a big believer in space in a life, space in a working week. And for me, that really breeds curiosity, creativity, and then hopefully innovation out of that. I'm naturally type A personality, want to be busy and at capacity all the time. So I'm more likely to overload myself. But I find when I have space, I always used to joke that I come back from a holiday with a startup, that when I have time to stop to think, is when the ideas start bubbling. And I'm massive on that with my teams, that we need to sit at an 80%. So we've got a 20%, one for when problems arise, but two, so there's capacity for play and capacity for fun and creativity. And I'm a massive week at work this week. And yesterday my team did an art class for 45 minutes. And one of the team is a UX designer, and he took us through a couple of drawings. And that space, I think, was so good for us in, giving us opportunity to actually think through things we hadn't normally thought through, discuss things we wouldn't normally think through. So that is a big one. Understanding the guardrails within corporate and the guardrails within startups that you've got to move is another massive one for managing energy. So it's both sides of the coin, right? Startups are wonderful in the sense that you've got all the freedom and the flexibility, but you've got all the risk and all the work. Corporates, on the other hand, it's lower risk. Somebody's paying your salary, even if this doesn't work, but you've got boxes that you need to move within. And I say to my team, you can move fast in a corporate if you know where the edges of the lanes are. So we always do an exercise whenever we start a new project of going, okay, where are there boundaries that we can push here, and where are there boundaries that are hard lines? And in corporate, you'll have a monthly capital process, you'll have a business case, you'll have somebody that owns a budget. There are things that you can't move. But there are creative ways that you can get around some of those, whether it's knowing a guy in IT that can bypass the security process, or whether it's knowing where we've got a little bit of, I know. Freaking out. I should have done the caveat that nothing to do with my current employer, nothing to do with my current employer. If I give you an example, one of the things that I did at Coke was run restructures. And so we would run a large scale sort of transformation program, but we would run it with startup ways of working. And one of the things that involved was getting creative with what systems we're allowed to use. And I'm a massive Airtable fanatic. So for those of you that are on the call that haven't played with Airtable before, oh my God. I could crack the nuclear codes on Airtable. You need to get around that. It is the most phenomenal tool. And we wanted to use it. And so that did not get through security clearance. And they told me that it would be 3 months for a review because that's corporate process. So you get creative and you go, okay, can we pop this on a credit card for the first month, or can we frame it as a trial? Can we de-identify the data so that it's a less risky decision? How are there ways that within corporate we can do startup ways of working in a way that's less risky and less of a concern for the corporate entity that you're working within? So I'm a big believer within my team of going, all right, where can we get creative here within everything that is legally bound, meeting risk and compliance obligations? But definitely getting creative within that space. And then cross-functional teams is the last one. I've never hired a team that are carbon copies of each other. You need diversity. You need people with different experiences, different ways of thinking. One of the things that Deloitte does really well is that we all do personality profiles when we're within your team. Where does everyone sit and how do they think? And so I know for me, I'm a driver. I'm great at organizing, structuring, and I'm good with detail. One of my team members is a guardian. A pioneer. So he's big thinking, big picture. So he's the guy that I pull into brainstorming sessions because I know he will go big when I go small. So building a team that's diverse means you bounce off each other and you discover cool little things and you bring different components to the table, and innovation is inherently cross-functional. So that's always going to breed better ideas, better solutions.
And David, thanks Marley, that was really expansive and quite inspiring, and I think a lot of people will, hopefully they won't want to go and work at Deloitte and they'll want to work at a startup. So David, you obviously transitioned from a corporate to a startup, and you've actually just recruited a new CTO. So obviously you've got a much smaller team, a lot less resources. How are you managing that innovative spirit within a smaller team? How are you, obviously you wouldn't yet have the budget to be able to do personality profiles and stuff like that. How are you doing that on a day-to-day basis?
$50. I've got one outstanding in my inbox. I just need to get around to it. The critical resource is time, not money, for that kind of a thing. Yeah. But hiring a CTO, I think it goes back to our first point around passion. And certainly in this generation, and anyone working now, it's not just the job and the work product and what's my areas of responsibility, but it's why does this organization exist? Like, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do? Who are we trying to add value for? So I founded COGSflow because we wanted to take the speed limits off growth for small businesses. We wanted to provide inventory as a service, and we wanted to get ahead of the how much product should we buy by helping people right size that decision, but also showing up with a checkbook. So we like to say that we back small businesses to grow to become not so small businesses. We're proud of what we've achieved. In 9 months, we've bought almost $1 million worth of inventory, which unlocks almost $3 million worth of revenue for our clients. And that kind of caps out their revenue. And we like to say that every day we unlock about $9 grand in revenue for our clients. So we're excited by that. We're a tech startup, but we are yet to write a line of code. Like Marley says, it's all in Airtable, off-the-shelf SaaS with a few logos. And we're super excited about Michelle joining because we'll be able to dream in ways that we can't pronounce right now. That's why I'm super excited about her joining. And it starts with, why do we exist? What can we do? We think you can really help. Would you like to have the keys to the kingdom and help us get there? And I think there was a question before we started. In a startup, you are always selling. The vision, the dream, the 5-year vision, the 30-day vision, all of the momentum and what's going on. And certainly as a founder level, it's my job to make sure that we are excited, that we're heading in the right direction, that we're logging the wins because no one will do that for us, and that we're unblocking the team. I'm trying to build, and we are committed to building, a talent-dense organization. I will be the weakest member of my company forever. No one joins the company who's not as good as me. And we've got our eye on superstar achievers across the board. And we're ambitious about where we want to head. So I think it's a combination of being excited about where the organization is headed, as tiny as our startup is, and aligning that with, hey, we think you can add real value and you can grow us, but also grow yourself. Being realistic that no one's joining a company for 50 years. Thanks, Marley. We'll let you know when there's an opportunity to join. No one's joining for 50 years. Let's not imagine that you are. For kind of the 2 to 3 year mark, what can we both achieve together, and what's next for you? How can we help you get there? I think Culture Amp, which is a Melbourne-based startup, has done lots of great work there, and giving folks the autonomy and reign to run, just acknowledging that they're probably spending a budget with fewer zeros than they're accustomed to. But hopefully that uncertainty is more exciting than daunting and more scary. They're the sorts of folks we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kelly, when it comes to the recipients of the Pearcey Foundation recognition, have you seen in the years that you've been deputy chair some consistency with the character traits or the type of individuals who are being recognised by the Pearcey Foundation? Yeah,
I think we have a criteria, which is that
it's an awards, yeah.
Yeah, but and so just to explain, so Trevor Pearcey was the engineer who led the team that built the world's 4th computer, which is called CIRAC, and it's half the size of this room, and is currently in ScienceWorks. It's actually the only restored machine still in existence. So if you saw the Enigma machine, the movie there, it's 1946. So we are quite amazing as Australians, as inventors and creators of technology. So that's my passion these days. And really it's a matter of the people who've taken a risk, made a difference and inspired others. And that's what is a nice consistent thing to look at. But that could be across many different sectors or industries. So it's all around technology entrepreneurs. One of the things that I've seen as a commonality within Victoria, so where I'm based, and in Australia, is that we're really good at making platform businesses. Yeah. So you've got all of the different ones. And Invato is a good example, and 99 Designs. And so Lenny Mayo and Sian and Collis Teed won the Entrepreneur Awards over the years. And of course, Canva was actually an early, and we often get people at an earlier stage. So I think the Canva team where Melanie was 6 years ago, and somebody actually said, could you tell me who are the winners, just because you seem to pick some good ones that make money later after paying them. I'm going, I know, it's quite good, really, because it's a peer judged award. You don't nominate yourself, and you get nominated by people across the industry. And then there's the medals and the Hall of Fame. So we actually think that it's important to recognise the people who have made a lifetime contribution to technology. And we've got a Sporting Hall of Fame, for goodness sake. And I used to say when I lived overseas, I'm Australian, I don't drink beer and I don't like sport. And they'd go, oh, you're not. I go,
you're very strange then.
Yeah. But that idea that you can take, it is those people. And often they are people who have failed at one or two businesses, because that's the cycle that this happens. You don't succeed at everything. And it is that ability to try something and then maybe you've scaled too quickly and then had to pivot and go back and be really small and come up with a great innovation of a technical element. Platform businesses. So Pearcey.org.au, we've actually got the New South Wales Awards happening at the moment. So I don't know who won, but like Bronwyn LeGrice was the one awarded for And Health this year. Yeah. So again, that's a real entrepreneurial spirit of how to harness finance and in a particular sector, and a different way of approaching it. So
I think you've also highlighted something really interesting, which I'd like to put out to the call to everybody, is that notion of, you were talking about courage and failure. I think that's something that I'd be really interested. Warwick, from your experience, obviously you've worked in that very entrepreneurial space as a startup early in your career, and then you've been a leader in corporate as well. Have you had experience of failure, and has that helped propel you and get that fire in your belly to actually innovate further? Have you got a story?
I've got so many battle scars. I'm just hiding it all, but all the time. And it's just part and parcel of it. I've had so many failures, whether it's an idea that we've tried to implement that's just gone belly up, whether it's my people management, do you know what I mean? Thinking around, I should have handled that totally differently. Why didn't I ask these questions correctly? It's always, but I think always when I suppose it's easy to beat yourself up, but I think you always have to look at and I think that's what's really important. But I think also as part of the failure, you have to make sure that you're around the right people as well. And I think what's really important is, as a startup, you can't do this by yourself. You need people to succeed. And you need the right team, the right people, the right mentors. I see a lot of startups, even in my previous roles and even currently, where they don't have advisory boards. And there's so many people out there willing to give their time. You just have to ask. And you know what? They're not always going to tell you what you want to hear, but that's a good thing. And I think that's all part of failure. And I think it's important to recognize that, because you get better and better at it as you go along by learning and listening and pivoting. So I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, what about your experience? Have you ever been tempted, because I know you're still working obviously within the travel sector, have you ever been tempted to go back and work in a corporate environment when you've had those dents and those moments of not complete failure, because you're still running a very successful startup, but you've had your set of challenges, that's for sure. So do you want to share something that has actually propelled you to keep going?
Yeah, listen, I'd be lying if I say I hadn't considered it. I think most of us would be, but I think it's, in a lot of ways, it would be easier to work with a large organisation to help them manage their travel. In part, that's what I've been doing with my consulting. However, I think what it does, it limits my ability to be able to problem solve. And it's not just about a group of people you want to problem solve. I actually want to spread the love a bit. And I think I do enjoy engaging with different types of organisations and helping them out. And I think that's core to what I enjoy doing. And I think the other part, I did start off in travel management companies, and it would drive me crazy going back and working in that space. It's working and looking at, and one of the things that really drives me is trying to make better travel management programs for organisations, because for the time there, I was just implementing the same shit over and over again, and it just wasn't fixing problems for people. And that's a core motivator for doing what I do. You want to fix problems, and if you're not doing that, in a lot of ways, you don't have a product. So absolutely. Yeah, it's a big thing for me.
Something else that I wanted to ask the group, and this is probably for you, David, initially, and also based on what Kelly shared with us with her startup and her passion project for 8 years. And I know, David, corporate social responsibility is something that you're inherently passionate about with what you've actually started with your own business. Do you believe that whether you're a startup or whether you're a corporate, when it comes to innovation, that it should be embedded in some social responsibility? Do you believe that's something that is really motivating for greater teams to get on board and actually move forward with some sort of genuine mission?
Absolutely. CSR, corporate social responsibility, has to report through operations. It cannot report through marketing. Otherwise, we're all wasting our time. And I would encourage anyone who's considering or about to found a company is to think carefully about the social and environmental direct impacts of what they're doing and try and embed positive purpose somewhere along the line. We can talk at length around that. I'm sure that there's another Pivot series around that. But I just wanted to rewind and pick up on what Simon said around the fear of failure or the risk around that. Startups are inherently risk on. Startups are inherently, this is hard and by default we may not work, but it's worth it nonetheless. And for anyone who's considering starting a business, try and kill it. Try and put it to bed. Ask the smartest people with the most knowledge about your area to try and disprove it. I think Warwick was saying advisory boards, there's a heck of a lot of goodwill in the sector. Send a LinkedIn message to someone who is in the area and offer to buy them whatever the Zoom equivalent of a coffee is and say, I've got this crazy idea. I want to do this. Why won't this work? And sooner or later, you will drive down to the founder is assuming that this is possible, that this is technically possible or financially possible, but more likely humans are trying to do this, or humans will want to do this, or humans will want to change from something to something else. And then the next thing that any founder should do is try and put data or evidence around anything like that. Create a website for 20 bucks, buy $20 worth of Google ads and see if you can get some email addresses of people that like what you're doing and want you to keep going. It's much easier and cheaper to do that before you quit your $200,000 a year job, and you'll be much more compelling for folks that are trying to line up behind you.
Yeah, and I think, Abby, it's important that we also, as we've all said, right, startups inherently risky. Failure will lead to learning. You need to have the resilience to step up and jump every time you've knocked down, get back up, figure out why you were knocked down and learn from it in the future. But I think it's also worth admitting that's really hard. One of my favorite examples is I was on a flight back from India. I'd just been over to India with the Australian government for my startup for 2 weeks. I got an email from our direct competitor, who was a massive corporate, that said they were launching a new solution that was practically our solution. And they were launching it within 6 weeks. So we'd been building this startup for 18 months. We had a pilot in market. We had a couple of integration concerns, and a competitor who had a lot more money and a lot more existing customers launches over the top straight away. That's massive. That's devastating. And I think entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit, it is about resilience, but it's also about putting the infrastructure and the networks around you to make sure you are okay when things are tough. And one of my girlfriends quit her corporate role and found her own startup 18 months ago. And she said, if you had one piece of advice, what would it be? And I said, get into therapy. Put up whatever, whether it's meditating, exercising, therapy, what is the infrastructure that you're putting around yourself so that if this doesn't work, you're okay, and that you're taking care of yourself. Because I think we can put rose-colored glasses on and go, failure is learning, resilience is easy, but at the end of the day, it still stings, and you still got to make sure that you've got a network around you to help patch you back together after that sting.
No, 1,000% agree. Yeah, hopefully failure isn't fatal, and it doesn't cost a marriage or a mortgage. And I think a core part of being a founder is what to do with that feedback or data point. Is it, do you dig your heels in and keep going, or is it, hey, we should shut this down or completely change? And yeah, put great people around you so that celebration and commiseration, because it happens in the same sentence.
I think the other part of it too, we started the first part of our existence working on our own in an office in Kensington, and we moved into Stone and Chalk, and that transformed our business, because not only did we have the support of around Stone and Chalk with us, but we also had the support of other founders and other people. And it's not just for founders, but it's also for other tech people, our finance people. So everyone can go and speak to other people. And to me, that's an invaluable resource in itself. And so I think there's plenty, as David was saying, there's plenty of support out there. And if you're really thinking about getting into business and launching and making that launch, you really need to put yourself around other people that can really help you. And it's not just your straight mentors or your advisory board, but it's other founders. And I think an area like the hub that both myself and David are involved is just invaluable as a resource.
Yeah, and whilst it's good resilience, it's inspirational. Being around
100%.
startup founders is addictive. Everyone's got this audacity to believe that they can change the world, and it gives you energy and you get new ideas and you do deals. It is
inspiring. And I've only been in this environment for 7 months, but compared to, I've worked in bureaucracy and corporations, the energy that you get when you talk to a group of startups, that it is that fire in the belly that I am going to change the world. I believe in what I'm doing. It is infectious, and it's something that I believe will grow more, particularly post-COVID, because I think there's a lot of innovation going on. People are thinking outside the square and they're wanting to do things differently. So I think we are going to see, we already are, growth in startups and startup scaling because of, particularly in the digital space, because we're using platforms just every single minute of the day. So yeah, I definitely think that this is a final question before we go to some questions from the people who are on the call. And we also had some questions sent through when people registered. And this is from everybody. So I'll go around the table, so to speak. What does the future of innovation in your business area look like? So this is just, I know you could talk about this for 20 hours, but this is literally just a summary of what does future innovation look like in your area. So who would like to go first? I'm not going to go, Kelly.
So I've got a personal, I love a bit of dealing with my the sunshine in the afternoon. I saw Marley doing that too. And I'm about the quadruple helix of innovation. So I've actually studied innovation theory. I was trying to do a PhD and then ditched that, but I was teaching it as well. And the quadruple helix is in Silicon Valley, we look at you've got to have the financial value and there's the business value and the like, but there needs to be the social value. And so that's what David was talking about. So that's why digital social innovation is the space I look at. So how is tech being harnessed for good? And how do we collectively create a world through technology that serves us and we don't serve it, which is part of us being the creators. So to actually really drive innovation, you can't just have government, industry and government, business and research. If you don't bring community along, civil society, then that's why we've got to where we have now. So if you don't bring, we know that businesses that don't bring the customer, citizens aren't brought along, students as study subjects of that, as well as voters, if we don't engage people in their humanity in the creation and bring them to this table as far as innovation, then we're just going to keep creating the same stuff that really doesn't fix the world. So that's my passion, that there's a socio-technical imaginary that we are all collectively creating, and that really we learn from the past, we sit where we are today, take with the success, and then build where we want to go tomorrow. And that's what gives me passion and purpose, whichever way I might do that, in government, in education, in community sector, or in business.
Yeah. Inspiring.
So, there we go.
Thank you. What about you, Marley? And this is specifically in Deloitte. Where do you see the future of innovation in I know you haven't been there for a long time, but just a quick response about you've obviously got a good understanding. You've got an epic brain, so you'd know exactly what their vision is. What do you understand that to be?
So my sweet spot is ventures and strategy. So I help corporates innovate, and I help them work with startups, and I help them build their own startups. And for me, what is getting me really excited at the moment, we've gone through this period in Australia where everybody thought it was a good idea. Everybody thought startups were sexy and we throw money at them. Then everybody thought, okay, we don't want to throw money at them, we want to do them ourselves. And now we're coming off the edge of what, particularly within the Sydney ecosystem, what has been a sort of 7-year investment. And now we're trying to figure out what the return on investment is. Is it anywhere? How do we do it? And I'm a big believer in buy, not build. I have seen very few corporate ventures, when built from the bottom up within a corporate, that work well. Instead, I'm a big believer in buy post Series A, keep it completely independent with light touch governance, and then see what happens. So I'm particularly excited. I'm particularly excited to see where we go now that we're a bit of a loss as to where the return on investment is in corporate innovation. So we'll see.
Very exciting. David?
It's rough to follow. That sounds pretty cool.
I know it does, doesn't it? Oh my God.
I think for us, it's the discipline and the clarity to articulate where we want to go.
Yeah.
And it's progressing towards that and learning and changing the narrative for progress and for the future. So if we're still telling ourselves the same stories and dreaming the same dreams in 12 months' time, we will have failed. Like, we have to progress. And that's usually discounting stuff, as in stopping dreaming about the stuff that is possible, but we just can't make it happen because we can't, or we're not the right folks, or we're in the wrong context. Avoiding the tempting distractions. I think we were talking before about enterprise sales cycles, which, yeah, we have been friend zoned by lots of folks, and that is fine. Again, we will just die and get lost in traps. Again, it was like going back to my teenage, adolescent, romantic self. It's not you, it's me. We'd like to keep in touch. We think you have a bright future. That's great, but I still die. And I think it's inspiring our folks, like recruiting genuine superstars that will progress us forward. That's exciting. That gets me out of bed every day. That's super exciting for me.
Warwick, what about you? Talking about the talent piece. Obviously, you've literally been in this new job for all of 4 days, but what have you got a sense of? Obviously, you've worked in IT before. Have you got a sense of the innovation that you'll be engaged with internationally into the future?
Yes. So I think for me, it's about where the future is about that different segments that I touched on before, because you have to build up the framework around the deep tech elements. What's the future going to be? You have to have the dreamers, and you have to be able to nurture that pipeline of ideas and thoughts in small companies. And as they go through those different cycles, you have to be there. So it's not just let's go to Series B, Series C, and off we go. Yes, there's a place for that, but it's actually building the value chain all the way through. And I think that's where the values, Marley's point around post-Series A, you're spot on, because that's what we did in Vodafone. That's exactly what we did. We moved, when we built the models, it was buy, not build. Period. However, having said that, we had the R&D elements, because some of the stuff you have to build because you need to have that internal IP and you can't give it away. So I think it's going to be very much blended. It's going to be people from all, and I suppose having that much more diverse view. And Kelly, you touched on the ESG modeling and framework. Absolutely. It's around that whole circular economy, right? When you build a product now, what's its footprint going to be in the world? And we have to actually drive that. And that's one of the things that I'll be doing within Kyndryl. And I did this in Vodafone as well, was that whole circular economy and making companies more responsible for that. So we won't actually buy product unless you can actually go into that sort of circular motion. And that's really one of the things that we're going to be pushing very hard.
That's so exciting to hear that, Warwick, because it's corporations have to take this seriously. It has to be, led by people like yourself to make that significant change. And Simon, I'm curious to know, with borders opening shortly, with people flying around the world, what do you see the future sort of innovation in your space?
I actually think it's actually getting people to fly less around the world. I think one of my greatest fears at the moment is that we will go back to where we were in 2019, which was about traveling too much, consuming too much around travel. I think carbon emissions in travel, 2% of the global carbon emissions came from travel in 2019. We need to reduce that. I think it's incumbent on us to do that. And I think a lot of that innovation is actually around avoidance of travel. And I think I was having a discussion with somebody the other day. We all have travel budgets as a monetary thing. Why don't we have carbon budgets? Why don't we have incentives as individuals, as organisations that incentivize us to travel less? So instead of traveling up the front of the plane, we travel in the middle of or down the back of the plane, or instead of taking a private car to travel somewhere, jump on public transport. So I think there's those sorts of ideas and that sort of thinking we need to incorporate in the way that we manage travel going forward. And I think we really need to do that. And it's because it was crazy the way that we were operating in 2019. And my fear is we'll go back there. In fact, the industry is hungry for us to get back there. And to me, that'll be a step back, because we just can't continue to do that.
So you've all got synergy there, which is encouraging and exciting. That is the future innovation. We have to think about environmental factors. We have to think about our carbon footprint. We have to think about social responsibility. diversity, inclusion, all the things that you've touched on today. So thank you so much for your input and your contribution. It's been a fascinating discussion. There are a few questions, so we will be on the call for another 10 minutes. So I'll just read them out and then anyone can respond to them. Warwick, I see you've been actually responding in the chat to a few people and sharing your contact details. So thank you for doing that. That's fantastic. So the question that has come through, let's have a look. Okay, this is interesting. One piece of advice that you'd give someone who's about to transition from a corporate environment into a startup. So they've obviously got an innovative idea. This has come from a delegate who's on the call. David, do you want to answer that one? You touched on it earlier. What would your advice be? Someone's got a really great idea. They want to explore it. They've got a job in a corporate environment. They're not engaged with it. What's the piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, one. So personally, sort out your relationship with your bank, because as soon as you leave ongoing permanent PAYG employment, banks hate you. Two, on the idea itself, consult widely, start selling. The pitch deck is not the thing that you make at the end of the process. The pitch deck is the thing you make at the start of the process, and you just keep refining. And three, structure your life in such a way that it's fun. As Marley said, the feedback, the learnings, the failures will come thick and fast, hopefully, if you're doing it right. Yeah, and lastly, I think it was Lauren Kaplan at Startmate that said, go for a larger ambition, because small ambitions and large ambitions are equally difficult to execute on. Increase the size of your prize by trying to change the world. I think it was Google's has the toothbrush rule. Unless everyone on the planet uses it twice a day, they don't bother. Yeah, by default, go big.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this question?
You just gave 5 answers for the one. So I think you covered all of it.
Yeah.
I'm a startup founder. I don't have time.
Dave, to build on one of your specifics, one thing that I did when I was a founder, and it was actually one of my co-founders' ideas, is have regular scheduled touch points with customers, because that will re-inspire you. When you're down and everyone is telling you, put in, whether it's a regular testing session or go into market. At Coke, I used to say to the team, once every 6 months, we need to go on a drive. We need to be going consuming products, being in the truck. Same with startup founders. That's what'll bring your energy back up. So get as much face-to-face time with your customers.
So I think one of the pieces of advice that I got very early in my career, which I've carried through all the way through, was start at the end. And what I mean by that, think about exit. Because it's not that you want to leave your business when you're just about to start it. It's about the discipline of putting the systems and processes in place to make sure that you aren't the business.
Yep.
And I think that was a really piece of good advice that I received very early on in my career, which I've used all the way through. And when you really break it down, because I remember when they're saying, I'm thinking, hold on, I'm just starting. I'm going to go and do this. And it's, think about the end. Think about how you're going to exit.
Yep.
This is another interesting question. Do you know or is there any data on traits and character qualities of a founder of a unicorn? I've got some thoughts about it, but I'd rather throw to the floor because you guys have.
We might go and actually review that with our Pearcey Entrepreneur Awardees, because there's a few in there. So it's a good question. I'm going to take on notice. And actually go back and do some research, because I can
give you a cool piece of data, not with unicorns, but with successful entrepreneurs, and it's a weird one. There was a study that was done that profiled adolescent males that were making extreme risks in day-to-day behavior. And when profiled, they had the same successful characteristics as successful entrepreneurs. So if you've ever got a teenage son who's a little bit risque and causing you a bit of issues, he might be a future Canva founder.
Superstar.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So I think we'll come back. I go out to all the people who've registered for the events and we send them a copy of this recording and also answer any questions. So Kelly, I might follow up with you because it'd be interesting to see if there's any data through the award process, and the fact that you've got,
it would require, I might try and find a research. I'd love to, but I know that my capacity is I've got a full-time job. And, I'm enjoying getting paid every fortnight. It is very strange. And actually having leave. But I think paid to have leave. But anyway,
I think there's probably some anecdotal stuff. If you do a bit of reading of entrepreneurs, there's quite obviously they're very driven. They have clear purpose. They're often type A personalities. There's all those factors that one can draw on based on.
But it doesn't mean that if you're an introvert, you can't be successful as an entrepreneur. No, it means that you've got the idea. And I think some of the best solutions. So I've been involved with the I Awards for many years. And really the best innovators and solutions that came in there was somebody who really knew the problem. So a doctor or a pharmacist or somebody who was on the front lines like yourself, Simon. You saw the real pain of what's there. And same with you, David. You've seen an opportunity and you bring in the right people, right? So that's what I think is actually, like Warwick, you said, you're thinking about exit. David's thinking about the fact that he wants to be the least talented person in his company, right? Because that means that you are more than just you. It is not just the founder. And with social entrepreneurs, seriously, the cult of the personality, you can't be bigger than the service that you're trying to pay to your customer or your beneficiary. That's where I see there's a wannapreneur attitude that might be there. So don't get bought, don't buy into the hype is what I would say. Do it, prove yourself, but don't buy into the hype and keep grounded.
And I think
I love that, Kelly.
And I think there's another part to that too. There's always a good introvert around good extroverts.
Yes,
so
I agree.
And I think there's got to be that balance. And I've always find that introverts, they may not say something, but when they do say something, it's because they've listened and they always make sense and they always say something that's really critical to whatever you're talking about. So I think that's a real, you've got to think about that as far as when you're creating these teams. A lot of organisations I've worked for in the past have been full of salespeople, and that doesn't really get them anywhere.
Absolutely. So. It's that balance in talent. We've come to the end. It's Warwick's had to go off onto a call in the UK. So we bid him farewell. Thanks so much, Warwick.
Thanks, Warwick. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, guys. Great.
Good luck.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And everybody else, I'll stay on the call for a little while, just as we wind down. And I'd love to thank Simon, David, Kelly, and Marley for their input today. It's been really fascinating learning a little bit more about your personal journeys with your businesses and your employers and your awards and so on and so forth. And I think the people who are on this call, and we'll share this with a lot of other people as well, will learn a lot from your stories and your shares. So thank you, tremendous gratitude. And for everybody, good night, enjoy your evening, and we'll see you at the next Pivot event. Take care.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Abby. See you guys. Bye.
Thanks, Abby.